In 2024, global carbon emissions from fossil fuels have reached an unprecedented high, according to the latest research by the Global Carbon Project science team. The data reveals that fossil carbon dioxide emissions have climbed to 37.4 billion tons, marking a 0.8% increase from 2023. Despite the pressing need to reduce emissions to combat climate change, there is still no indication that the world has reached a peak in fossil CO2 emissions. This persistent rise in emissions underscores the ongoing challenge of addressing climate change on a global scale. The 2024 Global Carbon Budget projects total CO2 emissions, including those from land use changes like deforestation, to be 41.6 billion tons, up from 40.6 billion tons in the previous year. Over the past decade, while fossil CO2 emissions have risen, emissions from land use changes have generally declined, keeping overall emissions relatively stable. However, this year, both fossil and land use change CO2 emissions are set to rise. The research team, comprising experts from institutions such as the University of Exeter and the University of East Anglia, emphasizes the urgent need for significant emission reductions to meet international climate goals. The report highlights varying trends in emissions across different regions. China's emissions, which account for 32% of the global total, are projected to increase slightly by 0.2%, though there is a possibility of a decrease. In contrast, the United States is expected to see a 0.6% decrease in emissions, while India's emissions are projected to rise by 4.6%. The European Union is anticipated to reduce its emissions by 3.8%. Meanwhile, emissions from the rest of the world, comprising 38% of the global total, are projected to increase by 1.1%. Notably, international aviation and shipping emissions are expected to rise by 7.8% in 2024, although they remain below pre-pandemic levels. Emissions from land use changes, such as deforestation, have decreased by 20% over the past decade, but are set to rise again in 2024. Drought conditions have exacerbated emissions from deforestation and forest degradation fires, particularly during the El Niño climate event of 2023 to 2024. Despite these challenges, efforts in reforestation and afforestation are offsetting about half of the permanent deforestation emissions. However, technology-based carbon dioxide removal methods currently account for only a minuscule fraction of the CO2 emitted from fossil fuels, highlighting the need for more effective solutions. The temporary El Niño climate event has also impacted carbon absorption by ecosystems on land, known as the land CO2 sink, which is projected to recover as El Niño ends by the second quarter of 2024. Emissions from wildfires have been above average since 2003, driven by extreme wildfire seasons in regions like Canada and Brazil. These fires contribute significantly to the overall rise in emissions, further complicating efforts to stabilize atmospheric CO2 levels, which are set to reach 422.5 parts per million in 2024. Achieving net zero CO2 emissions globally is crucial to halting the rise in world temperatures and mitigating severe climate impacts. The Global Carbon Budget team estimates that at the current rate of emissions, there is a 50% chance that global warming will exceed 1.5 degrees consistently in about 6 years. This estimate underscores the diminishing carbon budget and the urgent need for accelerated climate action. While some countries are making progress, global efforts must intensify to put emissions on a downward trajectory towards net zero. The impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly dramatic, said Professor Pierre Friedlingstein of Exeter's Global Systems Institute. As world leaders prepare to meet at COP29, the call for rapid and deep cuts to fossil fuel emissions grows louder. The time to act is now, to ensure a sustainable future and to meet the goals set by the Paris Agreement.